Welcome to Cyberspace, where we dive deep into the psychology behind everyday behaviors. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, and today we're exploring a phenomenon that's as predictable as the calendar itself: New Year's resolutions. Why they're so popular, and yet why so many of us find ourselves giving up before February even arrives. We'll explore not just the failures, but we'll also uncover why any time can be the right time for meaningful change, and how we can use psychological science to make those changes stick. You know that feeling. It's December 31st, and you're filled with optimism about the year ahead. Maybe you're going to start exercising regularly, learn a new language, or finally write that novel. But by Valentine's Day, that new gym membership card is gathering dust. Your language learning app is sending desperate notifications, and your word count is still at 0. Don't worry, you're not alone in this cycle. Research on habits gives us a sobering reality check. Fewer than 25% of people stay committed to their resolutions after just 30 days. By year's end, that number drops to a mere 8%. But here's the fascinating part. Understanding why we fail is our first step towards success. Let's start with how our brains work. Recent neuroscience research shows that our brains are literally wired to resist change. When we try to make big changes all at once, we're not just fighting against our old habits, we're actually wrestling with neural pathways that have been strengthened over years of repetition. Add in ADHD or another neurodivergence, and you know this problem is magnified tenfold. Setting unrealistic goals is a common pitfall when making New Year's resolutions. Often these goals are too ambitious or vague, lacking clear, actionable steps, which can quickly lead to overwhelming feelings and eventual burnout. Science supports this, noting that overly ambitious resolutions are much more likely to fail. Another critical factor is intrinsic motivation. According to several studies, success is far more likely when resolutions align with genuine personal desire rather than a sense of obligation. Furthermore, the all-or-nothing mindset can be particularly detrimental. Many abandon their resolutions after the first setback, a behavior that can be mitigated by adopting a more flexible approach and practicing self-compassion, as behavioral psychology suggests. Additionally, both internal doubts and external negativity can sabotage our efforts, with psychological studies highlighting how these factors can severely disrupt progress. Lastly, the expectation of linear success in habit formation is misleading. Recognizing and celebrating each small step as a success can help maintain momentum and avoid discouragement, underscoring the importance of realistic benchmarks throughout the process of change. Think of setting habits like trying to redirect a river that's been flowing the same way for decades. You can't just throw in a few rocks and expect it to change course overnight. Instead, you need to gradually create new channels while understanding that the old pathway will still be there, tempting the water to follow its familiar course. One popular myth is that you need to start on January 1st to succeed. There's absolutely nothing magical about January 1st. We've learned that success is more about consistent efforts and starting when you're truly ready, regardless of the date. In fact, the exact start date of a resolution is far less important than the personal readiness and the specific strategies that you're going to use to implement the change. What matters more is whether you've developed a clear implementation intention, specific plans for how you'll handle obstacles when they arise. It's all about having the right tools and the right mindset in place, not the right date on the calendar. Studies have shown that people who feel confident and prepared are significantly more likely to maintain their resolutions, regardless of when they start. This finding is liberating when you think about it. It means you don't have to wait for a specific date to get started making positive changes in your life. Those fresh start feelings we associate with January 1st, you can create them anytime by focusing on your preparation and readiness instead of on the date. Some people find they're actually more successful when they begin their changes during quieter times of the year, away from the pressure and fanfare of New Year's. Something else interesting is that this pattern holds true across different types of resolutions. So, whether you're aiming to build new habits or break old ones, the key factor isn't the timing, it's having the right support system in place and being genuinely motivated to make the change. When you think about it, this makes perfect sense. Our brains don't suddenly become more capable of change just because we've hung up a new calendar. What if I told you that the way most people set their resolutions up is actually setting them up for failure? Let's take a look at what psychological research tells us about effective goal setting. You've probably heard of SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. But what you might not know is what research shows us behind why this framework works. It's not just about having clear goals, it's about what the researchers called self-concordance. In other words, your goals need to align with your core values and interests, not just with what you think you should do. Think about it. How many times have you set a resolution because you felt you should, rather than because you genuinely wanted to? Maybe it was trying to lose weight because society pressures you, rather than getting healthier because you want more energy to play with your kids. The research shows that when our goals align with our authentic selves, we're significantly more likely to succeed. This alignment between our goals and our values isn't just about feeling good. It fundamentally changes how we respond to obstacles. When we're pursuing goals that truly matter to us, we're more resilient in the face of setbacks. We're also more likely to notice and appreciate small signs of progress, which helps us maintain our motivation over time. The research reveals another fascinating aspect of effective goal setting: the power of what psychologists call approach versus avoidance goals. Instead of focusing on what you want to stop doing, like stop eating junk food, successful resolvers frame their goals in terms of what they want to start or achieve, like eat more nutritious meals. This slight shift in perspective makes a remarkable difference in both motivation and success rates. And here's another insight. The most successful goal setters don't just focus on the end result. They break down their goals into what researchers call implementation intentions. These are specific, concrete plans that link situations to actions. So instead of just saying, "I'll exercise more," they specify, "When I finish my morning coffee, I will do a 10-minute workout." This level of specificity turns abstract goals into actionable plans. And there's something else that research has uncovered about effective goal setting: the importance of what we might call the Goldilocks zone of challenge. Goals that are too easy don't engage us enough to create lasting change, while goals that are too ambitious can lead to frustration and giving up. The sweet spot are goals that stretch us, but still feel achievable with consistent effort. Now, let's look at something that most people completely overlook when trying to change their behavior: their environment. The research here is fascinating. Studies in environmental psychology have shown that our surroundings can either be our biggest ally or our worst enemy when it comes to habit formation. Consider this. Studies revealed that about 45% of our daily behaviors are habitual, meaning they're triggered by environmental cues rather than conscious decisions. This is why simply trying to use willpower so often fails. If you keep your phone on your nightstand, checking it first thing in the morning isn't a choice you make. It's a response your brain has learned to associate with waking up. The good news: we can use this knowledge to our advantage. Instead of fighting against our environment, we can design it to work for us. And this isn't about making massive change. It's about strategic ones. If you want to read more, put a book on your pillow instead of your phone. You're trying to eat healthier? Research shows that simply using a smaller plate will reduce your portion size by up to 22% without you even thinking about it. One thing to note about environmental changes: it does help if the other people who live in your home are supportive of you achieving your goal. Sometimes you can find yourself in a living situation where someone might try to undo these small environmental changes. If that happens, it helps to talk to a therapist or a friend about what's going on so they can help you understand how to resolve the situation. Let's dive a bit deeper into what's happening in the brain when we try to form new habits. And don't worry, I promise to keep the neuroscience accessible, but understanding this can be incredibly empowering. Your brain has a fascinating region called the basal ganglia, which acts like your own personal autopilot system. When you repeat behaviors in consistent contexts, this system starts to take over, making those behaviors more automatic and requiring less conscious effort. This is why you can drive home from work while thinking about what to make for dinner and sometimes not even remember how you got home. Your brain has automated this driving process on this route. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Recent research shows that this automation process follows a predictable pattern. Think of it like building a path through a field. The first few times you walk it, you have to pay attention to every step. But with each passing, the path becomes more defined until eventually you can walk it without thinking. This is why consistency is so important in the early stages of habit formation. One fascinating study found that it takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days for a behavior to become automatic, with an average of about 66 days. That's quite different from the popular myth of 21 days, isn't it? Now that we understand how habits form in our brains, let's tackle something really important. Why waiting for the perfect moment to make a change might be holding you back. The research here tells us something fascinating about timing and change. One recent study found that people who make changes when they feel personally ready are significantly more likely to succeed than those who wait for an arbitrary date. And think about it. What makes January 1st any different from, say, March 15th or August 23rd? The date itself has no special power. It's your readiness and commitment that matter. This brings us to a psychological concept called the fresh start effect. While research shows that temporal landmarks like New Year's can increase motivation, they can also become a trap. If you slip up on January 5th, you might be tempted to think to yourself, well, I've blown it. I might as well wait till next year. It's this kind of all or nothing thinking that's a major obstacle to lasting change. Instead, successful changers, those rare individuals who maintain their resolutions, tend to view each day as a potential fresh start. They understand that change isn't a single event, it's a process. And processes can be paused, they can be adjusted, and they can be restarted at any time. We're a podcast based in the United States, so we've been speaking about this through an American lens. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at how different cultures approach the concept of new beginnings and personal change. This isn't just about those 12 grapes eaten at midnight in Spain, although I have to admit, that's a fascinating tradition. Research in cultural psychology reveals something remarkable about how different societies approach change and self-improvement. In many Eastern cultures, for instance, change is viewed as a gradual, continuous process rather than a series of dramatic transformations. The Japanese concept of kaizen, continuous small improvements, has been shown to be remarkably effective in creating lasting change. These cultural insights aren't just interesting, they're practical. One study found that people who adopt a more incremental view of change, similar to the Kaizen approach, tend to be more successful in maintaining their improvements over time. It's about progress, not perfection. Take the practice of daily reflection in many Buddhist traditions, for example. Rather than waiting for a specific date to evaluate their progress, practitioners engage in regular self-examination and adjustment. This ongoing awareness creates a framework for continuous improvement that's quite different from Westerners' all-or-nothing approach to change. In Chinese culture, the Lunar New Year brings a different perspective to fresh starts. Rather than individual resolutions, there's often a focus on collective renewal and relationship improvements. The tradition of cleaning one's house thoroughly before the new year isn't just about physical cleanliness. It represents clearing away old patterns to make room for new beginnings. What's fascinating is how these cultural approaches align with what psychological research tells us about successful behavior change. The emphasis on small, consistent steps, the importance of social support, and the recognition that change is a continuous journey rather than a destination, these aren't just cultural traditions, they're evidence-based strategies for lasting transformation. Even the timing of change varies significantly across cultures. While Western societies often focus on January 1st, many cultures have multiple New Year celebrations throughout the year, each offering an opportunity for reflection and renewal. This multiple opportunity mindset might actually be more beneficial for sustaining long-term change than putting all of our eggs in the January 1st basket. In our digital age, it's worth examining how technology impacts our ability to form new habits and break old ones. The research here is particularly interesting and sometimes counterintuitive. Recent studies have shown that while habit tracking apps can be helpful for motivation, they can sometimes create what researchers call a dependency paradox. In other words, instead of developing true habits, we become dependent on the apps themselves. And when people stop using these apps, they often find their new behaviors disappear along with their daily notifications. But here's where it gets interesting. The most effective apps aren't just about tracking or reminders. Research shows that apps that help us understand our behavior patterns and create environmental cues for new habits tend to be more successful. It's not about the technology itself. It's about how we use it to reshape our environment and to support our goals. This insight has led to a new generation of habit formation apps that focus on context rather than just counting. Instead of simply tracking whether you exercise today, these more sophisticated tools help you identify patterns, like noting that you're more likely to work out after morning meetings or that you tend to skip the gym on rainy days. This kind of pattern recognition helps you work with your natural tendencies rather than against them. The most successful digital interventions also recognize that habit formation isn't a linear process. They expect and plan for setbacks, helping their users understand that missed days aren't failures but rather opportunities to learn about their behavior patterns. Some apps now even incorporate features that help users identify and prepare for potential obstacles before they arise. What's particularly fascinating is how technology can help create what psychologists call implementation intentions, specific plans for when and where you'll perform new behaviors. The most effective apps don't just remind you to meditate, they help you identify specific triggers in your daily routine that can serve as cues for your new habit. Maybe it's right after you pour your morning coffee or when you first sit down at a desk. The key is using technology as a scaffold for building habits, not as a permanent crutch. The goal is not to become better at using the app. It's to develop behaviors that eventually become automatic, requiring less and less technological support over time. As we wrap up today's episode, let's bring together everything we've learned about successful habit formation and change. Remember, this isn't just theory, this is science-backed strategy that you can start using today. The research we've covered shows that successful change requires 3 key elements: readiness, strategy, and support. Readiness isn't about waiting for January 1st. It's about honest self-assessment and genuine motivation. Strategy isn't about willpower. It's about understanding how your brain works and setting up your environment for success. And support isn't just about having cheerleaders. It's about creating systems that make it easier to maintain your new habits than it is to fall back into old ones. Here's something exciting. Studies find that people who understand the science behind habit formation are significantly more likely to succeed in their change efforts. Why? Because knowledge gives you power. When you understand that setbacks are normal, that habits take time to form, and that your environment matters more than willpower, you can approach change with patience and wisdom rather than just short-term enthusiasm. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. The best time to start isn't next Monday or next Tuesday or when the stars are perfectly aligned. The best time to start is when you're armed with knowledge and ready to take your first small step. And now that you understand the science behind successful change, you're better equipped than ever to make changes stick. Thanks for listening to this episode of PsyberSpace. This is your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. See you next time, and remember, stay curious.